So one of the biggest questions right now is probably this: who actually works best with Mortenax Blade? And honestly, I get why so many people are asking that before deciding whether to pull him or not. Because the thing about this character is he's insanely universal. You can pair him with so many different units. Older characters, newer characters, even someone like Ashfell who literally just released last patch. That flexibility alone already makes him one of the most interesting characters heading into version 4.3. And because there are so many possible combinations, in this video I'm going to break down the kinds of teammates that feel the best with Mortenax Blade, which characters gain the most from him, and which teams actually make the most sense depending on your account. Before we begin, please hit the like and subscribe button. Now if you have done that, let's get this video started. Before we start though, I just want to make one thing clear. Everything in this video is purely based on my own personal opinion and personal analysis. So if you disagree with some of my takes, feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comments below. Now since Mortenax Blade is such a flexible character, naturally not every teammate will benefit from him equally. There are some characters that technically can work with him, but honestly don't gain that much value overall. For example, a lot of super break focused characters don't really maximize Blade's strengths. Some elation units also fall into this category depending on the setup. They are still playable together, of course, but it's more like it works rather than this feels amazing. Firefly, Bootheal, and Rappa can all actually use Blade surprisingly well. Break teams care heavily about raw amplification, especially defense strat. And because Blade provides so much of it, he naturally fits better than people expected. In sustainless setups especially, Blade honestly becomes one of the best options available, and even in sustain teams, he still performs incredibly well. So to summarize, if he is a great unit for Super Break or not, he could work, but definitely not something he excels at. There are plenty of archetypes that desperately need him the most, and it's not Super Break. Then there are characters that actually gain decent value from Blade even if they are not the most obvious pairings. One really interesting example is Destruction Blade. I know some people are probably wondering if running both blades together even makes sense, and while I have not personally tested yet, at least on paper, the synergy honestly looks pretty decent. Yeah, both of them want enemies attacking them, so there's some overlap there, but at the same time they share similar HP scaling mechanics, and both benefit from follow-up interactions. Against enemies with heavy AoE attacks, the setup could actually feel surprisingly solid. And honestly, that same idea also applies to Mayday since his mechanics are somewhat similar too. Another group I want to mention here are dot characters like Kafka, High Silence, and Black Swan. I already know a lot of people are going to ask this question: can Mortenax Blades work in dot teams? And technically, yes, he can. Even though Blades himself does not really have direct dot mechanics, his buffs are universal enough that dot characters can still benefit from them. Defense strat and increased damage taken are useful for basically everybody. It's just that compared to the other dedicated supports, the efficiency is not quite as crazy. Now moving into stronger pairings, there are a few characters that I think actually fit really well with Blade. One of them is the Herta. As most of you already know, the Herta is a Erudition character who wants other Erudition units in the team to fully activate her mechanics. On top of that, she really lacks teammate that can consistently hit multiple enemies to help generate energy for her ultimate faster. Right now, 3B is considered one of her best supports because of the extra follow-up attack she provides whenever allies use their ultimates. And honestly, Mortenax Blade can act as a pretty decent alternative if you don't own 3B yet. He gives both buffs and debuffs, while also contributing follow-up attacks that help reveal Herta's energy consistently. So while it's not necessarily her absolute best team, it's still a very respectable option, right? Another interesting part is Jiaochu. Ever since version 3 started, Jiaochu's usage in endgame modes has honestly dropped pretty hard. And that makes sense because his popularity was heavily tied to Acheron. Once Acheron usage declined a bit, Jiaochu naturally started disappearing too. But even now, if you already own Acheron, running Jiaochu together with Mortenax Blade as a triple Nihility core honestly does not sound bad at all. Even though Jiaochu does not massively benefit from Blade himself, Blade gains a lot from Jiaochu, especially if you want to turn Blade into a more of a hyper carry DPS. Jiaochu's ultimate damage amplification plus increased damage taken debuffs can make Blade's damage become absolutely disgusting. And then there's Castoris. I know a lot of people are curious about this pairing specifically. Personally, I think Castoris and Mortenax Blade actually share some really interesting synergy, because both characters scale heavily with HP. That means Castoris naturally helps Blade generate charge faster as HP fluctuates throughout the fight. And this interaction becomes even crazier if you plan on going for Blade's E6 later on. At E6, every time Blade loses HP or gets hit, he gains additional charges. So when Castoris drains HP from the team, Blade basically starts generating free stacks constantly, making his follow-up attacks trigger way more often. That said, I still think this setup mainly works as an alternative if you don't own Evernight already. Now moving on to some of Blade's genuinely strongest partners, first we have Welt. Version 4.2 honestly turned him into an absolute monster. His new weightless mechanic is ridiculous with Mortenax Blade. Once Welt uses his ultimate, enemies affected by weightless suffer 40% defense reduction and reduced speed. Then on top of that, they also take increased damage, which can scale instantly high through his traces. And the scariest part, his E4 adds 30% all-time price reduction to enemies affected by weightless. So imagine stacking all of that together with Blade's own debuffs. The amplification becomes completely absurd. Whether you are running Blade with Acheron or using him as a hyper carry DPS himself, well, it honestly feels incredible here. Next is Saber. If you already know how Saber works, then you know she's a hyper carry DPS that relies extremely heavily on strong supports to maximize her damage. Usually she's paired with Sunday because he provides crit rate, crit damage, and energy regeneration to help Saber spam her ultimate faster. But surprisingly, Mortenax Blade actually works really well with her too. The important detail here is that Blade's ultimate damage buff only activates if there is another Nihility character in the team. So setup like Saber, Mortenax Blade, Sunday, and Welt actually sound insanely strong for maximizing Saber's ultimate damage output. The only issue here is sustain. Since this team relies heavily on delaying enemies instead of running a traditional healer, Welt basically has to function as pseudo-sustain through action delay mechanics. And finally, let's talk about the absolute top tier synergies. First is Acheron. Honestly, this one almost does not even need explanation anymore. Acheron desperately wants strong Nihility teammates, especially if you don't own her E2 yet. Back during version 2, this restriction was honestly pretty annoying because there were not many truly premium Nihility supports available for her. But now things are completely different. Mortenax Blade basically gives Acheron everything she wants, and the synergy is similar with Dahlia to Firefly. Since Acheron fully utilizes all of Blade's debuffs and ultimate amplification, the difference becomes ridiculous. And that's before even counting all the utility he provides. Blade also fixes Acheron's stack generation issues because all ally attacks can apply debuffs. Blade applies debuffs when enemies hit him, and his follow-up attacks generate even more stacks. So he massively improves her ultimate uptime, team damage, and overall consistency all at once. Honestly, if you play Acheron seriously, Blade feels almost mandatory. Strong debuffs, ultimate damage amplification, additional debuff stacks, and constant pressure throughout the fight. A lot of people also keep asking if Jiaochu is still necessary once you own Blade, and honestly, if you don't really own Jiaochu, it's not really a huge problem anymore. Blade can basically replace his role entirely for Acheron teams unless Jiaochu eventually gets a Nova Flare buff later on. Right now, something like Acheron, Blade, Welt, and Danheng in Baby Trillune honestly looks insanely strong already, even at low investment. And finally, the synergy with Ashvale. This is probably one of the craziest pairings Blade has right now. Ashvale generates follow-up attacks constantly, which lets Blade stack his mechanics ridiculously fast. On top of that, Ashvale also provides amazing offensive utility like defense reduction, crit damage buffs, and additional follow-up attack crit damage. So naturally, Blade's own follow-up attacks become way more terrifying in this setup. Unlike Acheron teams where Blade feels more like a sub DPS support hybrid, in Ashvale teams, Blade honestly starts feeling like the actual main DPS himself. And ideally, a future setup with Mortenax Blade, Ashvale, 3B, and Hyacinth honestly sounds terrifying already. So yeah, that's basically my full breakdown on Mortenax Blade's best teammates and team possibilities right now. What do you guys think? Are there any combinations you personally want to try once he releases? Or did I miss some of his team compositions throughout this video? Be sure to complete it on the comment section. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like and subscribe button, turn notification as well so you won't be missing out on any of my Star Rail videos. I will see you guys on my next one. Bye bye!